Well, many of you are no doubt wondering, why are we hosting this conversation on business and the economy in a sacred space? If you're experiencing some tension within yourself, either for intellectual or moral or emotional reasons, due to the conjunction of this context and this content, raise your hands. Let's be honest. Yeah, at least a few folks are wondering, how do we put together this tension between the sort of sacred setting in which we're talking and what's considered a secular subject? So can I really see a show of hands about the tension that people are feeling about those two things? All right. That's a good sign, right? Tony says it's coercion. I just led a class on power and social influence, so, I'm using what I know. I'm glad to see that there's this tension because in some ways we do perceive a disconnect. And yet, the real meaning of religion, religio in Latin, is to reconnect that which is sacred with what is secular. To really connect what is the day-to-day and what is ultimate. Okay? So we're here in this sacred space where we hear the Word of God proclaimed from this place, where we celebrate the Eucharist and break bread around that table. We affirm Christ's words that His kingdom is not of this world, but rather it's the ultimate embodiment and enactment of God's will. But the sacred space also reminds us that God's will is not the same as the world's will. That God's will transcends human borders and boundaries. That God's will and love know no limits, though we ourselves as human beings know limits. And yet, in the Jesuit tradition, we're inspired by Ignatius of Loyola's encouragement that we seek God's will in all things. And by the invitation we receive from Christ to labor at His side for the coming of the kingdom in this world. In fact, in Teresa of Avila's words, God has no eyes or ears or hands or feet but ours. So we are called to labor in this world for that kingdom. We live this connection whenever we see our occupations not as jobs alone, but as callings. We answer this invitation to connect the secular and the sacred when we contribute more value than we take. When we choose to see our success as entirely interdependent with those who have least in our society, the poor, the marginalized, the stranger in our midst. This creative and challenging tension between being citizens of the kingdom and being citizens of this country was captured in Sunday's Gospel, where Jesus tells the disciples, "Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and render unto God what is God's." He implies the infinite scope of God's sovereignty and the responsibility of all in authority to be servants of God's will. This evening, as we gather in the sacred space to celebrate a new chapter, an exciting new chapter, opening in Moyne's story as a Jesuit institution of higher learning, we also engage in one of the critical conversations of our time about the role of business and economics within our society. And so, knowing that we have lots to pray for tonight, I invite you to join me in a prayer. And if you would, just close your eyes as we bring our intention together, as we gather in this space, mindful of this new beginning in the Moyne's history, as we are mindful of the leadership and authority of our speakers and the great responsibility that lies upon them, of our excitement as we look ahead, and at the same time our great concern for our country and our world at this time. Gracious God, we ask your blessings upon Anne-Marie and Rob and Anthony, for your inspiration and encouragement in their work on behalf of the common good. We pray for our Board of Trustees and all of our benefactors gathered to support our college at this time in gratitude for their goodness, their leadership, and their generosity to us. We pray for our students that they become not only competent, but conscientious and compassionate leaders in business, in politics, in the humanities, in all sectors of human society. We remember all those who are unemployed and disenfranchised during these challenging times, both here in our own community and nation, and in our world. And finally, loving God, we pray that even as you began the work of your kingdom in and through the prophets, we pray that all those who pray to you and all those who are people of goodwill might labor together for a more just, equitable, and environmentally sustainable world for all. All this we ask through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you very much, David. Next, I have the honor and the privilege of inviting up to the podium, interestingly, another colleague of sorts of mine. The next individual is a co-instructor for an undergraduate management leadership course this past academic year in the management division. You may know him better as the president of the college. A man that needs very little introduction, so I will provide very little. The president of the college, Fred Costello, to formally welcome you to this evening's event. Thank you.
Thank you, George. And thank all of you for joining us here at this packed event this evening. Welcome to Moyne College. I particularly want to thank our three panelists. Tony Dwyer is one of the most astute analysts of the economic trends of our time. Very busy man you often see in the media, highly sought after for his thoughts and opinions on this rapidly changing world of ours. Tony, thank you. With us also tonight is our representative from the 25th Congressional District, Congresswoman Anne Marie Burkle, working very hard to represent us in this district, and we appreciate the fact that you took time out of your very busy schedule at this hectic time of year to be with us tonight. Thank you. And finally, Rob Simpson. Rob is the head of Center State CEO, for those of you not of the region, equivalent to our Chamber of Commerce. Very busy man who's also co-chair of the Central New York Regional Economic Development Council, a model for pulling people together, for collaborating, and for leading the economic strategy of this region here in Central New York. So, again, thank you, Rob, for taking time to be with us here today. This is a big day for Le Moyne College. In my first address in September of 2008, I came before the Le Moyne community and initiated a process we call One Le Moyne. I said we must come together as one to answer the question, what must Le Moyne College become? Where, in the landscape of higher education, among some 4,500 schools, public, private, large, small, 2-year, 4-year, where do we fit? As a Jesuit college here in Syracuse, New York, where do we make our mark? Where do we want to go in the future? What must we become? We started a series of conversations, hundreds of them. I met with every department for dinner. And that following month, in October of 2008, I met with the Division of Management to talk about them and their future. And it was clear that they did not think they were reaching their potential. There was more to be done. That was a very good year for them. From the spring of 2009, they received AACSB accreditation, a major achievement for the division. But that fall of 2009, in November, I met with the division and I challenged them to answer the question, what do you want to become? What should business be here at Le Moyne College? They pulled together in a way that is one of the most impressive examples of teamwork and spirit that I've witnessed in my professional career. They started an intense process over a period of months of coming together and talking about where they have been, where the fields that they represent are today, and where they want to go. Struggling with the question, what must Le Moyne business become? Coming out of those conversations is a cohesive and energized division with a sense of vision, a commitment to moving aggressively forward to providing the best education possible to our students. Their top goal is to create a school of business here at Moyne College. So today, I am proud to announce the creation of the Moyne College School of Business. I particularly want to thank George Kulik and Wally Elmer for leading the division through this process. Wally, your leadership as dean has been extraordinary. People have rallied behind you to create this sense of excitement and a commitment to change. This year alone, as a result of those efforts, we've seen almost a 20% increase in undergraduate business enrollment, and I know that that's just the start of great things to come. I want to thank the members of the faculty in the business division and the management division for all that you invested in this process, all that you did to get us here today. I want to thank our provost, Linda Lemure, for leading and supporting this effort, and my colleagues throughout the college. We pitched in together, supported this unit in envisioning its future, and today have this very exciting announcement. And to you, our loyal alumni and stakeholders, we know we can count on your support as we move forward now with this school to make it all that its faculty want to become in order to better serve our students. I thank you and now introduce to you the Dean of the School of Business here at Moyne, Wally Elmer.
It was a 31-year journey, but it was worth it. Now, tonight's announcement represents an important investment in the future of business education here at Moyne College. Several years ago, as President Costello mentioned, he introduced the One Lemoyne Strategic Planning Initiative, a strategic planning initiative that would involve all of us, a true bottom-up experience. He challenged the entire Lemoyne community to consider how best to improve each and every asset, every function of the college, to commit ourselves to change, to identify ways to better serve our students, and ultimately to distinguish Moyne College. In the fall of 2009, President Costello met with us, the members of the management division, and asked that we consider what we wanted to become. He asked us to consider our dreams and tell him what we needed to do in order to rise to a new level of excellence. In early spring of 2010, and in response to President Costello's request, we began to assess the various strengths of our business program. We wanted to identify what made us unique. We've always believed that Moyne College is itself an important strength. As a member of a network of 28 Jesuit colleges in the United States, Lemoyne projects institutional strength, a true identity. Lemoyne is a youthful Jesuit institution, a young college, a nimble institution, unfettered by years of institutional practices that could have deterred us from our path of change. Nearly 500 years, Jesuits have developed future leaders through a time-tested business education model that brings together the strengths of this college's Catholic Jesuit heritage. At the core of business education is our commitment to the Jesuit ideals of intellectual rigor, pure personalis, and service to and for others. Our brand of business education is unique and superior in that it is layered, longitudinal, and interdisciplinary. Longitudinal in the sense that tomorrow's leaders require a strong foundation in business principles and practices that develops over time, and layered with opportunities to apply those business principles in an interdisciplinary, boundary-spanning manner. Business faculty prepare students who are grounded in the liberal arts for productive and meaningful careers as managers and professionals. Once we better understood our strengths, we turned our attention to weaknesses. We almost instantly became energized by the opportunity to identify real change that would improve the value of business education. In a one-year period, we identified, designed, and introduced some 23 initiatives to strengthen the overall quality of business education, and we remain committed to exploring additional change in what we teach and how we teach to bring additional change. The next step in our journey became the identification of external threats and opportunities, often created by the dynamics of the markets that we serve. While we were confident in our ability to improve and enhance everything within the management division, we were concerned about how best to convey the message of excellence to others. We needed to know more about the perceptions held by prospective students as they worked through the college selection process. In the summer of 2010, and in partnership with the Offices of Admissions and Enrollment Management, we surveyed prospective students. But it was a unique survey. We chose to survey those who had been accepted for business education at Moyne College, but chose to attend another school. We need to know why these accepted students decided to go elsewhere. And what we discovered was truly eye-opening. These potential students were confused about our divisional structure and how the structure related to enhanced excellence. They explained that our divisional structure was unlike any that they had seen during their visits to competitor schools, and in fact suggested that our divisional structure was very similar to that of the community colleges that they had visited. In addition to the negative perception generated by our structure, prospective students reported that our instructional support facilities were not on par with those of our competitors. Our classrooms, labs, and overall technology did not compare favorably with what they had found at peer competitors. With this information in hand, we became increasingly concerned. While we had worked very hard to achieve international accreditation for business and accounting through AACSB, the Assembly to Advance Collegiate Schools of Business, it appeared that accreditation alone would not be enough to overcome the negative perceptions about our structure and facilities. Subsequent to the survey, in early fall of 2010, we conducted an investigation of the network of 19 AACSB accredited colleges in upstate New York, and we discovered it was alarming. We were, in fact, the only college without a professional school of business or management. In addition, we learned that we were the only one of 20 AACSB Jesuit schools not organized as a professional school. Following continuing conversations with our AACSB mentors, with colleagues and fellow Jesuit institutions, our own students, alumni, and friends of the college, it became increasingly evident that our structure needed change. The message we were sending to a competitive marketplace was that we were not organized in a way that would enable us to capitalize on our strengths and opportunities that would allow us to continue to compete effectively for the best and brightest students. We needed a structure that would create an identity consistent with our accreditation credentials, our strengths, our goals, and aspirations. Furthermore, we needed to improve our instructional support facilities in order to build an identity associated with the enhanced excellence that was outlined in the One Moyne initiative. We begin to address those challenges tonight with the dedication of our new School of Business. But rest assured, tonight represents a beginning, not a conclusion. We believe that our new school will make us even more energetic, more agile and responsive, better able to perceive the needs of the world and the needs of our students and respond to them in a thoughtful, timely manner. Our new School of Business will offer an identity and a physical, cognitive, and emotional sense to all. Now, to assume that the transformation of business education represents the epic of one person's mistake, I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize the many people who made tonight a reality. First, I want to thank my colleagues in our new School of Business. Sounds pretty neat, doesn't it? I'm so proud to be associated with this professional group, and I thank you for your openness, your candor, your dedication, and perhaps most importantly, your professionalism. I also want to thank our senior administrative team. Our vice presidents challenged us, they encouraged us, and they worked alongside us to make this dream a reality. I also want to thank our senior leadership here at Moyne College. Provost Linda Lemure and President Fred Costello. They were never judgmental and were always willing to listen, to suggest, and take action whenever needed. In particular, without President Costello's guidance and encouragement, this transformation would remain a dream. In business at Le Moyne, we often debate the characteristics associated with 21st century leadership. Well, I'm here to say that President Costello is a great role model and is indeed a 21st century leader. Well, I don't take any more time, so we're going to turn our attention now to the Madden lecture this evening. And we have a very special program, an unusually timely and an important topic, and a terrific panel of experts. As you know, the topic that we've chosen for this evening is the state of our economy and economic development. And to help us better understand the dynamics of our national, state, and local economies, I'd like to introduce the following panelists. You grab this remote microphone. In the honor of our program. Anne-Marie Burkle of Moyne College class of 1977 is a member of the U.S. House of Representatives, serving on the Foreign Affairs, Veteran Affairs, and Oversight and Government Reform Committees. A native of Auburn, New York, Anne-Marie worked as a registered nurse before returning to school to earn a law degree from Syracuse University. She spent time practicing at a private law firm before being appointed as an assistant New York State Attorney General representing the state of New York on behalf of Upstate Medical University. Anne-Marie has donated her time and experience as a pro bono attorney for the Central New York Women's Bar Association as an advocate for Vera House, a shelter for victims and domestic violence. Our next panelist is Anthony Dwyer of Moyne College, class of 1987. He's the Chief Equity Strategist for Collins Stewart LLC, a leading independent financial advisory group, and a commentator on CNBC. He joined Collins Stewart LLC as the firm's Chief Equity Strategist in the United States. Tony started his equity research career at Prudential-Based Securities in 1987 and served as an equity market strategist in a number of small regional broker firms prior to joining FTN Equity Capital Markets in 2003. Well regarded in his field, he's widely seen and quoted on CNBC, Bloomberg, and Fox, in addition to online and print media. And last but certainly not least, Robert Simpson has been a long, strong advocate of partnerships and coalition building to promote effective regional economic development. He serves as the president and chief executive officer of CenterState CEO, a 12-county business leadership and economic development organization based in Syracuse, and as the executive director of the Central Upstate Regional Alliance and president of Syracuse's business incubator, the Tech Garden. He previously served as president and chief executive officer of the Metropolitan Development Association of Syracuse in Central New York. Rob. Now, in an attempt to maximize the time that we have remaining, one of the things that we've done is to beforehand provide our panelists with a series of questions. And I will ask our panelists to try to maintain a 2 to 3 to 4 minute response pattern. We'd like to get as many of the questions as we possibly can. At the conclusion, we'll have a question and answer series for the audience. And immediately after, this is really good news, we have a reception over at the campus center and everyone is invited. Question number 1. Some of the points. Would you please comment on your assessment of the state of the U.S. economy, current strengths and weaknesses, future opportunities, and potential pitfalls? How does your outlook regarding the national economy relate to the current and future of the economy in upstate New York? And I thought we would go in order.
Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. It's such a pleasure to be here. And my bio said I graduated in 77, but In 1969, I came here as a freshman in the St. Joseph School of Nursing when we used to get bused over here for our sciences and our English classes. So I have a long history with Moyne, and I'm so delighted to be here today. With regards to our economy, the first thing that comes into my mind are jobs, and when we're talking to students such as here at Moyne, the concern for this unemployment rate that has hovered around 9, slightly over 9%, for the last 20 plus odd months. And I think if I had to define what's going on in our economy, when I talk to small business owners in the business community, is there's such uncertainty. They don't know what's going to happen with regards to what Washington is going to do. They don't know what their tax rate is going to be. They don't know how the Affordable Care Act is going to affect them. They don't know, they just can't predict. They don't know what is going to happen, and so they hunker down, they don't spend money, and they don't invest, and they just sit on their cash, afraid to take on more debt. And so this uncertainty that we've created among our private sector is really what we've got to change. We've got to send a message from Washington to the private sector, because I think the answer in getting our economy turned around, and getting the American people back to work, is it's got to come from the private sector. And our message to the private sector, to the job creators, to the small business owners is that you are the ones who are going to solve this problem. You are the ones who are going to put the American people back to work. You're not the enemy. We're going to give you a tax rate that you can plan on, and you can plan 5 years out. We're not going to keep changing it. But the House of Representatives and the Senate, we're going to agree on a budget so this country has a budget to operate under. We're not with this Affordable Care Act, the Dodd-Frank Act, all these massive pieces of legislation that have been handed over to the regulators. The regulations create such uncertainty for our community. So I think we've got to, in Washington, our responsibility is to get back on a track, of course, where our business community can begin to plan, and we do that by giving them some certainty.
Great, thank you. Well, I can't believe when the President was explaining that I'm highly sought after, I was about to go like that and see who he was looking at. But I'd be remiss, my mother was a Moyne grad, and I was in the class of '87. For people that are standing in the hallway, she would get mad at me if I didn't mention that there are chairs in the front. I know for myself I probably won't bite. I don't know about these two. But I'll explain what I do through a story. A couple of years ago, I was coming up to upstate New York to visit my parents, and my mom likes to knit and sew. So, I was going by a field of sheep, and I said to the shepherd, if I can count the exact number of sheep in that flock, can I take one home to my mom and give it to her? And the shepherd said, absolutely, there's thousands there. There's no way you'll get the exact number. I said, 5,133. And he couldn't believe it. He stepped back, he said, I can't believe you got the exact number. Go ahead, pick your sheep. So I went, okay, I'll take that one over there. And he said to me, if I get to guess your profession, do I get my sheep back? And I said, absolutely, there's tens of thousands of professions, there's no way you'll ever get it. He goes, you're a stock market analyst. I said, I can't believe it, how would you ever know that? He goes, because out of all those perfect sheep, you picked the only dog. On a more serious note, Occupation Wall Street, or Occupy Wall Street, he's moved to Moyne College after I read it in adulthood, which I used to write Wall Street Beat for adulthood in 1985 and 1987. And just, I want to leave you with a thought on that. I'm the evildoer. I'm a Wall Street analyst. I'm also a father of two, a husband, a donator, a graduate of Moyne, hopefully an overall good guy, and just trying to make ends meet. When people protest, I would love it if they would once in a while highlight the good guys. Because, you're at a table of evildoers. You've got somebody from Congress and you got somebody from Wall Street. It's not that bad. I work down there. As far as the economy goes, I'm much more optimistic than I think anybody on the planet. The driver of economic activity in the United States of America is interest rates. When interest rates drop dramatically, it makes it so that people like you and I who own homes can refinance those homes. I can get a 5-year adjustable rate mortgage, which I've never done before, I can pay 2 7/8. I remember my parents paying in the mid-teens. I'm sure some of you paid in the mid-teens. If you paid a 5% mortgage on a conventional mortgage 2 years ago, you can now save up to, I know somebody at my firm that's saving $1,500 a month by refinancing their debt. When the interest rates go down, it makes money much more accessible. As the Congresswoman said, there's no question there's issues out there. At the end of the day, the United States of America does not have a money problem. We do not have a money problem. Recessions happen when people and companies need money and don't have any access to it. We don't have a money problem. We have a spending problem. The reason we have a spending problem is because of uncertainty, so clearly highlighted. That uncertainty is going to get removed one way or another over the next couple of years. But the one thing I do know is that, I'm sitting there, I see Doug Pinckney, my best friend growing up, Doug Pinckney, you know. You know what? He came up here a few years ago, and he's built one heck of a company that's on a major trajectory path that has put him in the country's best growing businesses, not in comparison. And the reason for that is because he didn't get scared, he didn't get defensive, he didn't complain that everybody's out to get him, he just made it happen. And I think for myself, as a Moyne grad, and for the students most importantly sitting in this audience, you've got a choice. You can get a job. I mean, there ain't nobody on the planet, especially Jen Sayah, who was betting that I would be sitting up here 27 years later. As a widely known expert, I'm a political science graduate from a liberal arts school named Moyne College in upstate New York that many people haven't heard of, but I want to win. And I think that one of the problems in the country is we've got to get that spirit back. And I do see it, and I do hear it. And by the way, there's no economic numbers coming out telling you we're in a recession. So I think this is a very exciting time from an economic standpoint and from an investment standpoint. We just have to embrace it.
So I was going to go somewhere totally different with this, but I want to win too. So here's what worries me, and here's what we're up against. So if we want to win, we got to know the competition. The competition is this: as a share of total GDP in exports, China 36%, Canada 35%, India 24%, Japan 18%, EU 15%, the US 13%. We are in an environment where, as you heard, consumption has slowed down, in part because of confidence. As a result of that, our U.S. production has lagged as consumption has slowed. Many other countries around the world have suffered the same fate, and they've adjusted and they've accommodated for that by thinking about the context of their business in a more global setting. And one of the most remarkable opportunities that not only this country and this region have is to be a more significant global economic player when it comes to getting not only our manufactured goods, but increasingly our highly sought after, highly skilled services into other markets around the world. Other countries are doing it. Our peers, our competitors are doing it. Here in Central New York, about $3.6 billion in annual exports of goods and services leave this region and cross an international border. It's about 9.8% of our GDP, so we're lagging the international average a little bit. But there is a remarkable opportunity for our economy to create jobs, and not only any jobs, but high-wage jobs through increasing the amount of international business that we do. If you think about it in just macroeconomic way, 95% of the world's consumers live outside of the United States right now. 87% of the global growth that's projected over the next 5 years is going to come outside of the United States right now. So if we want to be competitive as businesses, as consumers, as communities, as governments in the global context, we need to be selling and looking at those markets as markets of opportunity. Candidly, I think that there is no country that is better positioned to compete in that global economy than the U.S., because what you need to be competitive is innovation. For innovation, you need highly skilled people. This region has certainly a wealth of both, and I think that is an increasingly important direction that we've been thinking about as we try to turn this economy around.
Our second question. Much is made of the need for regulatory reform. Can you point to 2 federal or state regulations that you feel are inhibiting economic growth? And please explain why they're having such a negative impact. Can you also point to 2 regulations that you think are essential for economic growth?
The regulatory scheme that really our country is facing, and we hear it all the time, is right now is really very high. Let me back up 1 second. I do want to make one comment about Rob's comments, and that is successfully last week in the House and the Senate, the President signed into law. We did pass 3 free trade agreements, which is huge for our district with Panama, Colombia, and South Korea. That's a good thing that happened, and I really believe it's going to benefit our district and our So we've worked together on that. We're so excited about that. With regards to regulations, when they passed the healthcare law and they passed Dodd-Frank, what happened with those 2 bills and with other laws as well, they handed them over to the regulators. So, for instance, if you take the Affordable Care Act, there now are 30,000 pages. HHS has promulgated 30,000 pages of regulations and how we're going to implement this new law. So when I sit around at the round table with businesses and commonly we have advisory councils, they say that we don't know how this is going to affect our business. So when we get to that point with regulations where it's burdening our businesses, it's stifling creativity, it creates this uncertainty, we say we've gone to the extreme. When it comes to regulations, there has to be a balance. We all know we all know the extent now of the cleanup, what's going on, because there was no regulatory framework years ago, and that lake became so polluted, the most polluted lake in the country. So we imperative that we find a balance. We just passed last week in the House what was called cement, which was actually had the EPA had passed several new rules that would affect the cement industry, pretty much close down the cement industry in this country. Now, there's not going to be an economic recovery without cement and being the cement industry in this country. So we passed a law that rescinded those regulations, and those are the kinds of things we've got to do. We've got to do the benefits burdens analysis. We've got to be reasonable. The regulations to protect the environment, to protect safety, but on the other hand, we cannot impose such regulations that are going to strangle the private sector, and strangle industries and businesses to be able to do what they need to do. So, thank you.
The great thing about government is they always know what to do for us. The only problem is it happens way after the fact. And the reason I say that, with all due respect, is Dodd-Frank happened after a 50% decline and one of the worst recessions in our history. Outside of the Great Depression, it's called the Great Recession is what we had. So what did they do? They decided to pass Dodd-Frank. What did Dodd-Frank do? Everybody's complaining about the volatility in the stock market, myself included, and we're going to talk about that later tonight. But at the end of the day, the reason that happened is Dodd-Frank prevented banks and Wall Street from being the buyer of last resort. Now, if all of a sudden we, Goldman Sachs or some of the other firms on Wall Street decide that they want to buy, the market's down 5% in a day because it's really no reason other than a quant push the button. They don't stand up and buy it anymore because they're going to be drawn up in front of the Congress and they're going to be asked why they were taking advantage of the public by buying at such good prices when everybody else was selling. So what you've done is you've taken away the other side of the trade, you've taken away the buyer. So I think the regulatory environment in the U.S., the problem with it is pain, as we all know in our personal lives, pain is the motivator, right? Change comes through pain. And we've been in so much pain in this country over the last 10 years, especially from a financial market and job situation, that we're creating reform and regulation. And a great example of how not to do that now is to try and cut the deficit through government. The problem is government can never fix itself. It's the private sector that fixes it, and I'll tell you exactly how we do it. The interest rates in the United States of America are at the lowest level in our history almost. The reason for that is it's trying to create capital generation. It's trying to create people to invest in the stock market, invest in the bond market, invest in your businesses. And what that does is it creates a tax. When you turn over capital at a profit, it creates a capital gains tax. When you look at any time in our history where the deficit was close to 0% of GDP or getting close to 0% of GDP, it was only after a wild stock market move. The economy can't do it on its own. It's too big. You can't turn the battleship that quickly. You need capital gains taxes. So hopefully the regulatory environment is going to not go after the deficit to the point where we create all these reforms that are going to prevent all the businesses in the country from doing more business, which is what ultimately fixes it.
So I agree on all points, and you know I don't think that the position, the second part of your question, which was really to provide a positive regulation. I know it's not necessarily the most positive or popular position, but I'll try. Because I was giving some thought last night as I was thinking about this. We can come up with a list of hundreds of regulations that businesses are frustrated about. Most of them deal with nonsensical issues that require them to spend time, energy, and resources on things that don't really matter, right? You know, catalog was underway. I'm going to try to give you one that strikes me in a different light. CAFE standards, corporate average fuel economy. Here's why this one strikes me as maybe not so clear-cut of an issue. And it's a very personal one for Central New York. You think about our history in the automotive industry and what this community not only has gone through over the last several years, but is still going through with the closure of the new process here. The United States auto industry for 40 years resisted at every point and oftentimes incredibly loudly with a lot of their political resources and financial capital, the idea that fuel economy standards need to be raised in this country. Makes sense. I mean, at the end of the day, they had a market that was demanding a certain product. It was a larger SUV, it was a bigger truck, gimme. And the unfortunate reality is that at some point, it didn't take a genius to realize that the cost of fuel would increase, that would create a variety of changes in market pressures. And unfortunately, we found ourselves in a situation where here in Syracuse, we had a 4,000-person manufacturer. The primary business was to make transfer cases for four-wheel drive vehicles, not heavy transfer cases for heavy four-wheel drive vehicles, in which the fuel economy was lousy. And we reached a point very quickly over an 18 or 24-month period of time where gasoline shot up, almost doubled in price. And those vehicles were no longer exempt. And the lack of innovation in product development that took place in the auto industry over a period of 30 or 40 year period of time. I don't attribute it all to the lack of government regulation, but I do think that some element of the intent behind, I think, what Washington had tried to do and failed to do on a number of occasions, which was to get automakers to build more innovative, more fuel-efficient vehicles for the future, where fuel economy was going to be something that was important to people. I think there was an opportunity missed. I think it could have saved a lot of pain. It's possible. Or maybe it would have made things worse. I don't know. That one I scratched my head about.
Tony, let me make sure I get this right. Pain causes change. We were such a pain to President Costello that he finally allowed us to change. Is that? Upstate New York had a vigorous manufacturing sector for much of the 19th and 20th centuries. Do you see possibilities for reviving industries in upstate New York that have faded from the picture, such as steel or automobiles? Or should upstate choose to concentrate on selected niche industries, such as radar, that seem to survive the changing economic structure of upstate New York?
Well, we are fortunate to have so many wonderful defense companies here in the district, and they do a great job. We're very fortunate to have them here. But the site and certainly what has happened in our district in Central New York has changed dramatically a few years back. Right now, what we have a very strong market for eds and meds. We have great institutions and we have excellent medical facilities, and they really are our largest employers right now. But I think we need to, again, create an environment, and I think this is where Washington, as well as Albany, comes into this. We've got to, in upstate New York, create an environment where companies want to do business here. And our companies here in New York State, not only do they suffer from what Washington imposes on them, but they've also got Albany here. Now this, as you all know, we're going through redistricting. New York is going to lose 2 congressional seats. Texas is going to pick up 6 seats. We hear from our businesses, we hear from a business today, I'm being enticed to move out of the district, out of the state, to someplace where it's just easier and friendlier to business. I have 2 boys in Texas who decided they were going to start a machining shop. They hauled equipment from San Antonio to Austin, they got sales, they got up and running within a month. Now, how long do you think that same process would take here in New York? So, from a standpoint of what we're going to do to get our district and upstate New York back on track, we've got to appeal to New York State as well as Washington. We've got to make it friendlier. Because those who leave New York eventually will go over to China where it's easier, cheaper, they don't deal with as many regulations, they have cheaper labor, and then they leave our country. So we've got to create an environment. I think that's the biggest thing the government can do. Create an environment where a business has incentive to stay here and do business. There's no reason with our work pool, with the number of kids coming out of colleges and our academic institutions, with our national resources here, we should be booming. And for some reason we're not. And I think that Washington and Albany have not done a good job in creating an environment where companies want to stay and work.
The problem with people like me is we profess things that we're not experts in. I'm not an expert in the local economy, so I'm going to defer that to the other panelists. However, I will say that what's very interesting about the manufacturing sector is that consumer spending as a percent of economic activity is currently about 75%, plus or minus. When you take healthcare out of that equation, it's really not that different than it was 25 to 30 years ago. So the big move in consumer isn't us going out to buy TVs and high-end doorknobs. It Lowe's or Home Depot. It's us going to the doctor. It's us going to the hospital. It's us getting prescriptions. It's consumer spending on healthcare. The region clearly is, as my brother graduated from the orthopedic program at Syracuse University of Upstate. My dad is an attorney. He's not down by me, but he was an attorney at the time in Syracuse, New York. So the services sector has always been pretty vibrant. Now it's just it seems to be getting a bigger focus. And I certainly see that, as I mentioned from my buddy Doug. There is a great opportunity. And out of chaos comes opportunity, and this is certainly a chaos environment. And that's what we can win because of the spending on healthcare and the direction that the region is taking.
I'm a big believer in the fact that regional economies have specializations and that they ought to really focus on those things that they can do well, where they have qualified labor pools, where they have skilled workers, where they have good research and development assets on which industries can leverage, where they have a core group of industries and they have opportunities in common where they can leverage supplier and customer networks. All that stuff makes sense. At the end of the day, our traditional industries, some of our legacy industries, primary metals, you think of steel, crucible, so on and so forth. You think of the automobile industry, well, we lost and processed here. We still have a number of major tier 2 and tier 3 automobile suppliers. We have to continue to support those industries because they're a part of the foundation of our economic base. However, I can tell you that supporting those industries looks very different than it did supporting them 30 years ago. I'll give you an example. Markwood Switches, they're a company that's out in Cazenovia, so about 40 miles outside of Syracuse. They do a tremendous amount of work in the automotive industry. They primarily manufacture switches. They've done a variety of things in their years. They're actually a German company that came here about 25 or 30 years ago. Today, that company, if you walk into that shop floor, it's in a relatively nondescript building off Route 20 on the way down to Morrisville. It is one of the most innovative and high-tech manufacturing operations that you will ever see. It's a fascinating place. Today they have over 400 employees. They've seen literally they've grown by over 300% over the course of the last 2 years. There isn't a piece of equipment in that building. By the end of this year, there will be a piece of equipment in that building that's more than 4 years old. That is the future for some of our legacy industries, if you want to call them that, is in product improvement and process improvement. That said, there are areas where this region has strong strengths. Medical devices, for instance, with companies like Welsh Allen, where we're not only building world-class products, but we're selling them all over the world. In the clean energy and renewable and environmental systems area, we have one of the strongest indoor environmental quality clusters anywhere in the world. When it comes to agribusiness and food processing, this remains a major food production and food processing center, not only for the Northeast United States, but again, globally. There are industries where we are highly competitive, and we should target resources in those industries where wages are higher, where the economic return is greater. I think we owe it to our region to understand that. Part of Central New York's strength, in my opinion. And one of the reasons why Syracuse and this region have performed better than Buffalo, that have performed better than Rochester, that have performed better than Utica and Binghamton and other communities around the state, is that our economy is actually today more diverse than it ever has been. And that diversity in a period of economic uncertainty is a strength. And there's a conversation going on right now about whether or not we should focus on one or two or three of these core industries. And, I think the region candidly is leaning towards embracing that diversity that has really been thrust upon us over the last 15 to 20 years as companies have moved south and they've moved offshore. And embracing that diversity is a fundamental part of our long-term sustainable economic strategy. I personally think that's a smart bet.
Our next question. The future of upstate economy seems in many ways to be tied to eds and meds, as the saying goes. Do you see this trend increasing? Should it be fostered or simply allowed to compete in the marketplace of the upstate economy? And if it should be fostered, how?
Well, I think that the government's got to be careful not to pick winners and losers. I think that we really need to let the marketplace work. And so whether it's with energy or whether it's with health and meds, eds and meds, or whatever the industry is, I think the government, let me back up, there's been a whole earmark ban that we're not going to give companies startup money. And I have not taken that position because I think that that's a legitimate use of government money oftentimes. And we have many local good examples here in America of where the government was able to get the business was able to get a grant from the government who should start up money for a project. It worked really well because then that business got off, became independent. So, having said that, I think that the government can't be a venture capitalist. We just saw the whole solar piece with the solar panels. We've got to be real careful about picking winners and losers and really let the marketplace decide. And I think Rob made some excellent points about what works here, whether we take into account diversity, people seizing opportunities in this chaotic period. But it's got to be a level playing field. I think we have to be careful to protect that environment for people who want to take that risk. I mean, that's the essence of the United States of America. My parents were first-generation Americans, and their grandparents, my grandparents came here, their parents came here, because they knew when they got that the United States of America offered something that nobody else offered, and that was opportunity. And that's what this discussion is about. It's about protecting and preserving opportunity. So someone who didn't, so someone who's willing to work hard and take a risk, they can do well. That's the United States of America. So I think it's real important that the government has a level playing field, doesn't pick winners and losers, maybe gives them some startup money for initiating the project, but then backs out and lets the market decide.
I think Congressman Bowman is exactly right. I think, as she points out, the government's kind of got to get out of the way of the entrepreneurs and incentivize them to stay. It's so often we talk about entrepreneurs coming and trying to recruit people to the area instead of fostering the people that are already here and making sure that they don't go away. So that typically comes through incentives and tax reforms. In the company I work in, I'd love to create a great environment. Hopefully it's a nice family, rewarding kind of environment and from a corporate level. But at the end of the day, it's how much I'm paying. That's what's going to drive how they act and where they go. And I think from a government standpoint and from a commerce standpoint, we have to make sure that in the region, we foster the people that are already here to make sure they don't take a furniture place to Carolina or machinery to Texas.
So, the eds and meds sector they are just candidly, the normal way to put it, they're anchors of this economy. Without them, the Central New York economy doesn't look even remotely like it does today. It doesn't have a fraction of the health that it has, the vitality, or, in my opinion, the hope. There are over 65,000 people employed directly by higher education in 12 counties immediately surrounding Onondaga County. There are 140,000 college students. These are undergraduate or graduate students that live in that 12-county region. This is out of a population of 1.4 million people. 10% of that population that are here in this region are here because our institutions of higher education. think about the economic impact of education alone, forget healthcare, it is remarkable. And what's interesting about Central New York is not just the quantity of higher education and the quality. You have schools like Moyne, you have institutions like Cornell, you have tremendous technical schools like Clarkson that are bringing students not just from around this country, but from around the world. We talked earlier about exporting and doing business out of this region and internationally. Well, anytime a foreign student comes and enrolls here at Moyne or at Cornell, that is an export for this region, for this country. There's a remarkable amount of opportunity for us that is just within that employment and that student population alone. But you think about moreover the other roles that higher education plays in economic and community development. I mean, they're educators. They are enablers of innovation through the research and development that they do. They attract world-class talent through the faculty and administrators to our communities that wouldn't be here otherwise. They're investors. You need to look no further than 2 or 3 blocks away where there was a terribly decrepit plaza that is now turned into a remarkable anchor, not only for this side of the city, but for neighborhoods all the way around it, thanks to the work that Moyne has done. And they're centers of arts and culture and vibrancy for our communities. I think the educational sector is critical for all of those reasons. I also think it is one of our regions and our states' points of differentiation. And the extent to which we can continue to invest in those institutions and the great work that they're doing, I think that we will be the long-term beneficiaries. Because in the long run, U.S. economic competitiveness, to me, lives and dies on the quality of our education and the quality of our workforce. If people are trained in the skills, they will innovate and they will find through their remarkable sense of personal empowerment and freedom, they will find ways to rebuild this economy.
Most everyone is for energy independence, but the paths to this goal seem as varied as the sources of potential energy. What forms of energy exploration and utilization do you favor? Are there sources of energy that make more sense for upstate New York? Does it make sense to subsidize any of these sources of energy, whether it might be solar or wind power, gas or oil?
Well, I think that the goal needs to be energy independence. And this country, for a very long time, has not had a solid energy policy, much to its detriment. Because you hear from the local businesses, one of the biggest factors in the cost of doing business here and anywhere in the country is the cost of energy. We in the Congress passed several bills to get this country back drilling. The tragedy that happened down in the Gulf Coast happened, but we need to now begin drilling. We passed legislation that would enable drilling to begin to help the permitting process. I think the country has got to be far more aggressive drilling offshore and onshore. We have a pool of fuel here in this country that we're not tapping into, and because of the regulatory schemes, because of this, the imbalance. We talked earlier about the balance between regulations, and there's always the concern we must be good stewards of our own environment, but we can't do that to the detriment of our energy independence. I don't think, as I mentioned earlier, subsidies to whether it's wind or solar power, or ethanol. I think we've got to be realistic. Let the market decide. If someone can utilize a wind farm that works for them, they'll buy those wind turbines. The government doesn't need to get in the way and to foster one or the other. And I think the white elephant in the room here is, of course, hydrocarbon and what we're going to do with the Marcellus Shale. And again, we go back to the concerns for one of our greatest features here in the state here are our natural resources, are our lakes, and the importance to protect them and keep them safe and pure. I have an advisory of Energy and Environmental Advisory Council, and Dr. Murphy sits on there. We talk about fracking. We talk about the fact that fracking and natural gas can make us energy independent in the Middle East. That is a huge, it's just a giant step forward. The whole possibility of what it can do to our economy, what it's done in Pennsylvania. So at the very least, we have an obligation, I think, to explore and to make sure that there are safe testing sites going on. I think that's what Dr. Murphy is let's have some safe testing sites where we can ensure that we can accomplish fracking and extract that natural gas and not do it to the detriment of our environment. But I think we've got to have that discussion. We've got to have it in an unemotional way where we understand the benefits and the burdens and then being realistic about what we can achieve.
We're the Saudi Arabia in natural gas, from what I understand. How Saudi Arabia is with oil, the United States is with natural gas, and right now it's too expensive, and there's so many. It's very hard for me to take my car to the gas station and put natural gas in it. So there's going to be some time there. So I think going along that path of trying to capitalize and monetize that industry is very important. What again, not shockingly, I agree with the Congresswoman. If the government stays out of the way, markets will do it themselves. For example, solar. Solyndra is kind of the one that everybody knows about, appropriately so. The interesting thing of what's impacting the solar industry is that the pricing of it is crashing. Now that's bad news for the companies producing the solar panels and the products that go into the solar panels. But the other side of that trade is it's becoming much cheaper. In New Jersey, it's almost becoming cheap enough where it makes economic sense for me to put solar panels on my roof. So what we have to do is stay away from the knee-jerk emotional reaction, like moving all the drilling rigs out of the Gulf of Mexico because there was a spill that caused a spike in, there was no more drilling in the Gulf of Mexico unnecessarily. And that, try to avoid those short-term government regulatory moves, and really it negatively impacts basically any kind of entrepreneurship or capital formation.
So I agree with a lot of what my colleagues said. At the end of the day, I think we're crazy not to explore all viable sources of energy, whether they be traditional natural resources, whether they be new technologies that enable renewable energy. We, as a country, have a pretty deplorable mix when it comes down to it of acceptance and adoption of renewables as compared to other industrialized nations. In the long term, again, if we want to take a long-term economic view, I think that's a problem. We absolutely could generate a greater level of independence through additional drilling, through fracking. There's no question about it, but we would be crazy not to look at the negative externalities that go along with making those decisions. So there should be a vital debate about it. In the long run, I see an opportunity for Central New York, candidly, because of our geographic position, because of the high density of educational institutions, to try to be a part of that long-term energy solution. There's a lot of remarkable work that's going on at CESF on biofuels. And you've seen countries like Brazil that have made, they've done it through regulation, which isn't necessarily the thrust of the conversation we've had today, but they've achieved a remarkable level of energy independence through innovations and development in biofuel technology. There's been obviously a lot of opportunity around wind throughout upstate New York and pretty much in the Northeast. There's some really interesting solar technology development that's going on in the Albany area. So New York State, I think, is well positioned to play, whether it's on the natural resource extraction play with fracking, whether it's on the long-term future play as it comes to renewables. But I think the biggest concern is that currently we are highly dependent on other sources of energy from other parts of the world. And that is, as we see every day when we're in the news, that's a dangerous place for this country to be.
Well, before we invite our audience to ask questions, let me ask one question. We have so many young people sitting in the audience today that before we send them off after graduation, look at your crystal ball and share with them what kinds of issues, economic issues, is their generation going to have to deal with in both the short and long term.
Well, as I look into my crystal ball, to the students, the first thing I see is I want you all to understand and appreciate how great it is to be an American and to live in the United States of America. To appreciate that every day, that there are opportunities here that don't exist elsewhere. So I think that would be the first thing to say. To love this country and appreciate this country and what she has to offer you. Beyond that, I think that what was said earlier, what Tony said, I think you should have optimism. You should have this feeling of I can do anything and I can set out to do anything. I will work hard. The opportunity exists in this country. It may not be ready to care to when you graduate, but I think you should really understand and appreciate the talents that you have, the abilities you have, and never underestimate what you can accomplish with hard work, with perseverance. When you fail, you pick yourself up and you start over again. But I think that's what the United States of America offers, and I think that's. I think you've got to approach it from that point of view, because there's a lot of doom and gloom. Tony mentioned it earlier. If you just read the news, there's jobs, the economy, and it's just all this turmoil. You've got Washington down there fighting, so it seems. But I think you've got to understand that this country still has this opportunity, and you need to seize that. You're not taking up for the answer.
That's great. What is school and what a country? And the greatest competition, I think, to answer the question is, or the greatest challenge is competition. You know, there's a lot of young people graduating from school. There's, in my business, in the finance business, there's a lot of people that are my age that would love to get an entry-level job right now because they're out of work. So the competition is fierce, but the opportunity that was created by going to a college like Le Moyne, I think it's fantastic. I agree. It took me a lot of failure and a lot of time to realize that at Le Moyne I learned how to learn. You know, I was wondering, why am I studying this? This isn't going to do anything for me. What I found out was it made me learn how to learn. It made me want to be hungry. It made me want to challenge conventional wisdom. You know, I'm not as educated as a lot of my competition, but I think I'm as good as them because the education I received here, because of the training that my parents gave me, and because of my own will to want to win. I mean, I think what really gets me so upset, it really gets me upset, is when I look and I talk to people and they say, it's almost like you're talking to a defeatist. It's the greatest country on earth with the greatest opportunity on earth. And I think we just need to seize it. So the challenge is, are you up to that challenge? You know, are you going to call me 3 times to try and get an internship? Or are you going to say, oh, he's probably busy? You know, that's your decision. Your challenge is your own decisions.
I couldn't agree more. I checked literally before coming up here. There's a region-wide website that looks at employment opportunities in the sort of 90-mile radius around Syracuse, and there are 7,329 jobs that are available today with local employers and regional employers. There are jobs out there. People who are coming out of schools like Le Moyne are exceptionally well prepared to step into those roles. You may have to fight, and you may have to claw, and you may need to make that phone call 3 or sometimes 5 or sometimes 10 times. You may need to study a little bit later. You might need to work a little bit harder on that term paper. You may need to do something over and above to impress people. But at the end of the day, opportunity is out there. Not only the opportunity that other people have already provided for you to step into, but there's no better opportunity than the opportunity you can create for yourself. You guys have been empowered with a great education. You're very fortunate in that regard. So take that opportunity and run with it. Do everything you can with it. Reach out to the audience of peers, people who have been there, who've tried, sometimes failed, who've gotten back up, and consider this a family here in Central New York that are willing to help you be successful. We want to see you succeed, whether it's here in Central New York or anywhere in the world. You'll always be a part of this family.
Can I just add one more thing? Put this away. The challenge is to put the texting and the computer games and everything else away and go communicate with people. I'm going to kill my kids. Every time
I didn't see any of the kids applaud.
They're not texting, they're in the front row.
Do you take notes anymore? We used to write everything.
That's great advice. Well, now we're going to open it up to the audience. If you have a question, if you would please raise your hand. We'll get the mic to you.
Question for both Tony and for Congresswoman Inouye. Currency. We talk about jobs coming back to the United States. To some extent, isn't it important? Our currency to some extent makes us uncompetitive because the dollar is fairly strong, and when you compare it to the euro, you would assume it's going to get stronger. I'm not necessarily in favor of branding China as a currency manipulator. That's something that's in front of Congress now. However, at the same time, China has weapons against us just as we have things that we can do against China. Any comments from maybe one of you?
I'll let Tony, he's the expert in this field. The only thing I would say is I really don't see it as the role of Congress to regulate China's currency. I just think it's something that probably should be involved.
If you look at the dollar versus the euro, it's basically where it was 2 years ago. It really has a lot of volatility that surrounds economic activity. The reality of money flow, of where money goes, is to the highest real rate of return. So if inflation is 5% here and interest rates are 5% here, you're awash. You're getting really zero return, so money will go elsewhere. So that's really what historically drives currency movements. It's not China manipulating. But again, we do have a domestic economy, and we're here and looking at this region. And yes, there's certainly businesses. I talked to one that's on the investment committee of the endowment fund with me that's in a manufacturing company. And he talks to Senator Schumer about, currency and things. It definitely has an impact, but it's been that way. It is what it is for now. Maybe it won't be that way always, but against every other currency outside of the Chinese currency, it's based on the real rate of return, which right now is actually favoring the U.S. The real rate of return in Europe is higher. Like interest rates in Europe are higher, but inflation is a lot higher. So money's starting to actually come into the U.S.
Hi, my question's for Tony. You said that low interest rates were good for the economy because people could spend money. But if interest rates are so low so that money isn't making money, how is it helpful to the economy?
That's such a great question, because I know people on fixed income are suffering extraordinarily on that. My parents, being in that framework. And from a near-term standpoint, it's not great. There is a segment of the population from social, from the Moyne College, you have social thoughts and responsibilities that's bad. But what it does is it gives private equity, it gives capitalism a better chance to generate itself. Because the cost of capital is so much lower, it'll hire you or somebody else that will be out, and eventually the economy grows and interest rates go back up. So it's sort of like looking at the other side of the valley. Anytime interest rates have been this low, historically, I wrote a research paper last week about it, historically we have a pretty vicious rebound. So I would expect that you're going to get higher interest rates over the course of the next year or two. But right now it's very stimulative, because what it does is I'll give you a very quick example. Everybody kind of follows what mutual fund investors do. What you really need to follow are what pension fund investors do. And pension funds have most of the money that moves. Pension funds have to earn 8% a year. Like anytime you go and talk to the teachers' retirement in California, New York, wherever, they have a stated return that they have to get. So if you've driven interest rates down to 2%, but you have to make 8% per year, that makes them move their money up their risk scale into higher capital formation areas, which generates activity, which ultimately generates higher interest rates that become a good thing for those in fixed income. Takes a little time, unfortunately.
Hi, I represent employers in the area, both large and small. I'm an immigration attorney, and they come to me all the time saying that they cannot find U.S. workers who are able to do the jobs that they need. I get calls from students from Moyne and SU, foreign students who are bright, have their degrees, and since we're in a competition for global talent to keep them here, and we want the best and brightest to stay here, what impact do you see of the federal government in reforming the immigration laws, particularly with respect to H-1B visas and the skilled worker visas? Do you see that having an impact on improving our economy and the job situation?
Well, I hear over and over and over again from the agriculture farm. They can't find local workers, and whether it's an agriculture or dairy farm, they need workers, and they need a reliable workforce. And the H-2A program has been just the way it's been implemented. It's arbitrary. They're looking for a good guest worker program. And so, in fact, we were with the Farm Bureau certified last night and talked to them about that. And we're going to try to take some initiatives in Washington, because whether it's H-2A or the H-2B, those programs are imperative. You can find workers here locally to do that kind of work. The other issue, and Rob has brought this up on another panel we've been on, with regard, we had a hearing actually, with regards to so many of the students who come here to this country and are trained, to get a green card and to improve that process so they can stay and they don't go somewhere else outside the country. And, we could use them here. So those are the two issues we're looking at.
There's in the big picture, and this goes back to the question about where the region fits and where New York State fits, and there's always this discussion about whether or not we want to try to be a lower cost producer here in New York State or a higher value producer. And I think, at the end of the day, the country has the same decision. Personally, I think we've got to try to be the highest value producer in the world. And I think that's where the future is. I think that's where the top of the pyramid is, and I think that's where we want to move to. In order to do that, however, you need to have the best and brightest who are working for your companies, who are building new businesses, who are entrepreneurs and capitalists who are making those kinds of investments. The challenge is that we have an immigration system that restricts many of the best and brightest who want to be in this country, creating jobs in this country, investing in this country, who cannot be in this country. The other piece of that equation, though, is that we do, as a country, a terrible job of taking care of our kids here in this country who want to grow and want to learn and want to have an education. In the city of Syracuse, our graduation rate is our dropout rate, graduation rate, it's at 50% in the way you look at it. That's terrible. And if you think about the future of our region's economy and our country's economy being built on high-quality workforce and skilled labor, that is an unsustainable position. So, in my perspective, if we want to move up the value chain and we want to continue to build this knowledge economy with advanced manufacturing of goods and highest quality services, we need to reform immigration laws to allow us to bring in the best and brightest from around the world who will help us grow our country's economy. Immigration is the foundation of this country. It could, in some ways, be a big part of the rebuilding of this country. At the same time, we cannot turn our backs on people who are in this country who are out of jobs, who want skills so they can participate in that same economy. And if we do that, and we look at immigration as the salvation to filling the labor gaps in some of our key industries, then we've just done a disservice to millions of Americans who have every right and every expectation to those jobs as well.
My question is for Congresswoman Burkle. You mentioned the frustration of the small business owners with the uncertainty in the economy. Now I'm just curious, with your fresh eyes, what observation you might make about one thing the U.S. House of Representatives might do differently to promote a better economy?
We in the House, and really I have to say, I know the media sometimes doesn't portray what we're doing down there. We only pick and choose, but we really have focused on jobs in the economy. Everything we do, whether it's on oversight committee, we look at, and what we do there is we have hearings and we look at the regulatory scheme and look at the various agencies, what they're doing and how that impedes businesses. We call it the private sector. And then as a result of that, we craft legislation that addresses that issue. Many people would like us just to roll back the legislation. In some instances, that's what we do. But in the House, we passed at least 14 jobs to get the American people back to work. The problem we have, and the reality of what's going on in Washington, and one part of it, is that the Senate tables these bills. They fail to act on them. They don't look at that bill and say, well, okay, we don't like this part, and don't craft anything and send it back to us. So many of these jobs bills, and that has been the focus. The job creators, .gov is a website that we're trying to get people to go to or look for jobs, to understand what the situation is. Nothing gets done. And that's the reality of what's going on in Washington. It's very frustrating. It's the same with the budget. We passed the budget in April. The Senate doesn't have a budget. So there's not going to be a budget for 2012. The way things are going, we're going to continue with these short-term continuing resolutions, which again goes back to that uncertainty because no one can plan whether or not there's going to be money in the budget to provide for a program or a project. And so many of the things we do get frustrated. But I want to assure you that job creation, whether it's removing regulations, whether it's getting the government out of the way, job creation has been the number one issue on the House side.
Yes, I have I'd like to ask a question since I'm one of the Jesuits here and I've preached in this chapel many times and I've been to many masses. I've often heard, frequently we preach here on issues like the poor, preferential option for the poor, solidarity and so forth. And certainly in terms of the courses we teach here, one of the ways, according to those of you who graduated from Moyne well know, we measure, one of the ways to measure morally the economy is to ask yourself the question, what does it do to and for the poor? So I'd just like to ask you this question. When we think about the future of the economy, both locally and nationally, if I'm a poor person, and there are many, many here in this area, is there hope that the Congress and the business are thinking of me? So I'd like to get your opinion on that.
I think the best thing we can do for the poor is to get them jobs and to get them back on their feet economically. And I think that we have to be so careful because the United States of America, the American people, are the most generous nation on the face of this earth. No one in this country should be hungry. No one in this country should be without shelter. No one in this country should be without basic human needs. Having said that, and I think the government, and in some regards the government has gone overboard in this regard, almost to the point, and this is a difficult point to make, and I hope you'll bear with me, and you'll not misinterpret what I'm going to say, to the point where we have been too kind, where we have sent a message to some communities that the best you can do is a welfare check. The best you can do is food stamps. And not sending them the message that you, sir, you may have had a drug addict for a mother or a dad who was in jail, but you personally, you have a spirit inside of you that can succeed. And that's where I think our government has failed so many people in this nation, sending them the wrong message. They're not being empowered with that American dream. And not, when Rob talks about education, this education system in the United States of America, public education, they're failing our kids. It's a moral failure not to equip our kids with what they need to succeed. And part of that success is a message to them that you have talent and power and you can work hard and you can achieve just what that boy next to you wanted to Princeton achieve. That's America. And I'm afraid our government has gotten into a passive where it's easier to give a welfare check or it's easier to give food stamps rather than spending time with that person and empowering them to really be successful. You know, we talk about giving them fish or teaching them how to fish. And I think that's where our government is actually failed.
If you walk down the street and I walk to work each day from the Port Authority, I walk by homeless people. It's one of the ugliest parts of the country. The challenge that I have is, do I hand the guy a $5 bill or a $1 bill, and just keep walking, or do I say, all right, come on, let's pick up the street, let's pick up the garbage that you see right next to you, and I'll buy you breakfast, and then go buy breakfast. And that speaks to what Anne Marie said. I think there was a show on television that truly discussed it. And it talks to this, where the kids were watching it. It was one of those reality TV shows of which there were about 1,000 too many. And it was called the Repo Games. Okay, this television show had the repo man go out, and in this situation he went to a family, and he was going to repo the minivan. So the purpose of the show is if you answer 5 trivia questions right, you get to keep whatever they were going to read. That's the television. Great stuff. So, the gal answered the questions properly, okay? And she went and she jumped on her minivan and said, "This is great, now I don't have to work." And that is an explanation of how we've got to be careful to make sure that if we're fortifying the poor, which we absolutely have to do, we give them a reason to not just go like this, but give them something to do, so it invokes that spirit that you can succeed in the I think, best country in the world.
Before we end for this evening, I'd like to offer an opportunity for a great friend of the college and certainly a great friend of business education to share with us his comments about this or anything you heard this evening.
Thanks, Dave. The reason they decided to end with me to have me wrap this thing up is because Jen Saya told them that I would lead you on the most direct and quickest route to the bar. But seriously, this is a terrific night and obviously a tribute to the college administration, the leadership of the faculty, and many, many others, the support of alums and trustees, etc., who've got us to the point of the creation of a professional school of business and one that we can be proud of and build on. I would like to remind everybody of one thing that Wally said, however, which is that these things don't just stop when you announce them. These are living institutions. And without the support and the drive and the help of everybody in this room and in much other places, it won't prosper and it won't be competitive with our other schools, our aspirant schools, and people who we want to get ahead of. So I think from that standpoint, it reminds me, and I'm sure this is true for even trustees in the room, of years ago when I probably was MIA from this place for 15, 16 years, something like that, after graduation, not because I didn't like it. Matter of fact, I probably came back for one reunion or something, but just because nobody found me and nobody really asked me to do anything, so I didn't. Then one day, I remember I was in my office on Wall Street, and I was doing some meetings in different places, and I came back to the office, and my assistant said, "Oh, Mr. Madden, there's a fellow who's waiting for you to see you, and he's just been sick. How long has he been there? He's been there for about 45 minutes. And I go, "Well, who is he?" And he said, "Well, he's right over there. He's sitting on a chair in the hallway." So I looked around the corner in front of the receptionist, and there was this older Jesuit priest, or at least he was a priest. I didn't know he was a Jesuit until a few minutes later. But he was kind of rumpled down and, just kind of reading his prayer book or whatever he was reading, some inspirational document, I suppose. And I went over to him and I said, "Father, great to see you, but can I help you?" And he said, "Oh, are you Mike Madden?" I said, "I am." And he said, "Well, I'm Father Haig. I'm the president of the Moyne College." And I said, "Gee whiz, Father, why didn't you tell me? I would have, at least given me a cup of coffee or something." But he said, No, I didn't want to bother you." And I said, "I would have come back around." "No, I didn't want to bother you. I just wanted to see if we could connect with you a little bit." And so he went in my office, didn't take much time, was very deferential. He said, "Geez, I don't want to bother you. I know I'm unannounced." And he spent about 15 or 20 minutes updating me about what was going on in the place and asking me to come visit. So I did. So when I did, I came back and stayed for a long time and met Wally. Norb Henry, behind me, was assistant president at the time. And the idea of an MBA program was given birth. And through the support of the then administration, we created a very fine MBA program, and I became engaged in the prospects of the school from the business perspective. And it reminds me a little bit, deja vu tonight, seeing this celebration, because in effect this is another phase in that development. The administration, the energy of the faculty, the support of trustees as well as alums has now allowed us to create this school of business. And what I would say, though, in that context is it is going to be competitive. We are going to have to move forward, and we cannot do it without everyone pulling on the oar, because the boat goes faster and a lot farther with 100 people doing that than 2. So if you're not engaged in the college, I would ask you to try and get engaged. Well, I don't want to send Fred to sit in your doorstep for 45 minutes, but just take a moment and say, what can I do? If you are engaged, please stay actively engaged. And most of all, and in particular, whether it's a student or a faculty member or an administrator or a fellow alum, when somebody from Moyne calls you, take the call. Take the call and do something, if you can, to help that person. So with that, let's go to Bart. Thanks for coming.